The gas tank dial gives us an indicator of how much fuel is left in the tank, but it can be difficult to determine the remaining range, especially on vehicles without a trip computer. Determining the mileage a quarter tank of gas can cross depends on a number of factors, such as the MPG, overall size of the gas tank, number of passengers, style of driving, etc. In this guide, we'll go through different vehicle types and estimate how many miles can be crossed on one quarter tank of gas. If the driving conditions are consistent, a quarter tank of gas is actually going to provide more than a quarter of the total gas tank range. To understand why you can get away with driving a bit further than expected on a one-quarter tank, watch till the end of the video. How does the gas gauge work? You might be surprised to find out that the gas tank gauge is lying to you, as the manufacturers intentionally make the gauge inaccurate to make it psychologically easier on the drivers. Not only is the gauge not accurate when you're filling up or when you're near empty, but it also moves at an inconsistent speed depending on how much fuel is left in the tank. To fully understand what's going on, I'll break down the fuel tracking into a few sections, starting with the full tank. Full tank. When you're filling up to the brim, it's normal for the gauge to hit the upper limit. However, did you know that the same will happen if you insert 1 gallon less, and in vehicles with larger tanks even a few gallons? If the gauge was accurately portraying the amount of fuel in the tank, you wouldn't have a full tank by the time you reach your home from the gas station. The manufacturers have concluded that if the gauge was honest, owners would create a false perception that the vehicle is consuming more gas than it is. That's the reason why the gauge will stay in the full segment for a while and let you feel good about your investment in fuel. Empty tank. It's happened to all of us. We've miscalculated the range to the next gas station, and the fuel gauge slowly hits the bottom limit, but the car keeps going for miles and you end up reaching the gas station even though you weren't supposed to. This is actually a built-in safety system that allows you to reach the nearest station and refuel, as the tank size is typically in correlation with MPG, so all cars have approximately the same 20 to 50 miles. Keep in mind that some of the fuel is contained in the pipes between the fuel pump and the injectors, a non-trivial amount of fuel that is never accounted for by the gas tank sensor. Gauge movement. The gauge is not portraying the amount of fuel accurately at full empty, but also everywhere in between. Most drivers notice that the fuel gauge moves significantly faster in the second half and slows down as it crosses the halfway point. Some would say it's just a baseless suspicion, but it's actually true. The fall from full to 3/4 full can be almost twice as fast as the fall from 1/4 to empty. My theory is that the gauge is only accurate at the 1/2 tank point because it's too fast in the second half and too slow in the first half. Seeing the gauge at 1/4 tank would prompt everyone to go to the gas station and refuel, but if you're on a long-range trip and have no place to refuel, it will be more than enough to reach the next gas station. How many miles is a quarter tank of gas? To make any valuable assessment of how many miles a quarter tank is, we need to set a few parameters. First, let's assume the driving style and conditions do not change over time. For the most consistency, assume it's your daily commute to work. Next, we need to handle the fuel tank size. Generally, the larger the fuel tank, the more fuel the engine consumes, but that's not always the case. We'll discuss how many miles you can get from a variety of vehicles, and you can compare to a vehicle most similar to yours. How long does a quarter of tank last? In terms of time, a quarter of a gas tank will last longer in the city despite the worst gas mileage. Driving at 80 miles per hour means you'll run out of fuel in 1 to 1.5 hours as you're crossing a great range in a short span of time. Even though driving in the city can be up to 50% more inefficient than the open road, the relatively low speeds of 25 to 35 mpg allow you to drive for roughly 3 hours before you run out of fuel. Is it bad to drive on a quarter tank of gas? Letting the fuel level drop very low is not good because the fuel pump will start sucking in the debris found at the bottom of the tank, but driving on a quarter tank is still fine. Is it better to fill up at half a tank? There are certain studies claiming that filling up at half a tank is better as it creates less volume for the fuel to evaporate. From my understanding of the fuel system, the fuel will evaporate anyway, with the excess fumes going into the EVAP system to be used as fuel and filtered. Letting the fuel pump scrape the bottom of the tank is not a good idea, so in a way, filling up at half a tank is better. However, you can just as easily refuel at 1/4 or slightly less, with no risk to the vehicle. To summarize what we talked about in this video, the 1/4 of the gas tank will get you 100 to 200 miles of range depending on the type of vehicle. In general, passenger cars have a single tank range of 600 to 700 miles, so crossing 200 miles on the last quarter of the gauge isn't impossible. If you plan on optimizing your spending on fuel, try not to let the gauge drop far below 1/4 as the fuel pump and the fuel system can get foul from all the imperfections accumulated at the bottom of the tank. I hope this video helped. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and follow so you don't miss any of my videos.